This is Chemistry Unit 4, Chemical Nomenclature, Naming Type 3, Molecular Compounds. So molecular compounds do not have metals. So you will just be focusing on the non-metals, which is actually a smaller chunk of the periodic table. So the first step is to name the first non-metal. The second step is to name the second non-metal and change that ending again to IDE. And the third step is to use prefixes to indicate the number of atoms of each nonmetal. So here are the 10 prefixes that we will use. And again, you are free to write these on your periodic table if you don't know these. So mono is 1, but mono is never used to indicate the first nonmetal. And you'll see that in some of the examples. Di is 2, tri is 3, tetra is 4, penta is 5, hexa is 6, hepta is 7, octa is 8, nona is 9, and deca is 10. Now, it might also be useful to label your periodic tables with the type 3 nonmetals. So my type 3s are here in purple. You can see now I have put hydrogen into this group because it is a nonmetal. And then I basically highlighted these rows over here. So to be careful not to highlight the entire row. So there is what looks like sort of a staircase on the table, which breaks the table from your metals and your non-metals, right? And that's where I've indicated the type 3s, because sometimes we'll use the metalloids, the noble gases are in here. So these are all of your non-metals. And you don't have to worry about charges because we're simply going to use prefixes. So it might be a good idea to label your type 3s. And here's how it works. So if you have SO3, S and O are both in this type 3 group, right? They're both in this purple section. So the way to name this, S is my first nonmetal, and that's called sulfur. Now remember, we have to use prefixes. But sulfur is my first nonmetal, and if there's no number, then that indicates 1. But mono is never used for that first nonmetal. So this is not monosulfur. It only works for the first element, so you just call it sulfur. Now O is oxygen, but you change that name to oxide, right? Same as for type 1 and type 2 in the polyatomics. It's IDE, oxide. But now oxygen has a 3. The prefix for 3 is tri, so you put that in front of the oxide, and this is called sulfur trioxide. Next one, C and O, carbon and oxygen are both in that type 3 section. So C is carbon, and there's no number with carbon. That's a 1, right? So you just leave it alone. It's not mono, it's just carbon. But we do need to indicate the mono for the oxygen. Oxygen becomes oxide, and just notice the slight name change here. So I know it would be mono and oxide together, but you really don't see monoxide written anywhere. So if you have those two O's next to each other, you just cut off one of the O's. So this becomes carbon monoxide. So the mono is because there's only one oxygen, and you do indicate that for the second nonmetal. So this is carbon monoxide. Next, N2O4. So now we have numbers for both the first and the second nonmetal. Remember, these are both nonmetals now. They're type 3. So N is nitrogen, and it has a 2. So that would be dinitrogen. O is oxygen, and again, you change it to IDE, that's oxide, and then you have a 4 after it. So the prefix for 4 is tetra, so this is tetraoxide. So the full name is dinitrogen, you don't change that first element, and then 4 is tetraoxide, and you do change the name from oxygen to oxide. All right, now the reverse, if you have the name, how do you write the formula? So carbon dioxide. So I know that you've probably understood that this is CO2, but let's just check out why. Carbon, right, is just C. There's no number with it. So it's just C. Di means 2, and oxide was coming from oxygen, so it's O2, and that 2 is written as a subscript. Disulfur trioxide. So sulfur is S, and di means 2. Oxide is O, and tri means 3. So S2 for the di, O3 for the tri. Now be careful here. If you are just given the term oxygen, oxygen just by itself, there's no oxide here, it's just oxygen. Oxygen is a nonmetal, and it's also a diatomic. There are 7 diatomics on the periodic table, and you might want to indicate these somehow for yourself. If any one of these are asked of you, like if I ask for hydrogen, the correct formula for just hydrogen is H2. If I ask for bromine, the correct formula for bromine just by itself is Br2. So don't forget your 7 diatomics. And this is type 3 naming.